Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, June the 28th, 2024. Today I want to talk a little bit about NATO, that toxic organization whose eastward expansion has largely led to the conflict in the Ukraine, which has killed, I don't know, up to 1 million people, most of them Ukrainian. But still, NATO doesn't seem to care, and it just keeps going. And we do have to consider what's going on in NATO. We have a horoscope for NATO. I have looked at NATO's horoscope, and it has a leader, supposedly Secretary General of NATO. Now, we don't really know how much power the Secretary General of NATO actually has. I think the decisions are largely made in the United States, but still the Secretary General is at the very least a symbolic figure, and that person's horoscope is important, probably sort of more than symbolic. If the Secretary General has a particular view, I'm sure there's some way in which that view can be expressed, not to mention his or her public pronouncements. So on October the 1st, the new Secretary General of NATO takes office, and that is Mark Rutte, who I believe is Prime Minister of Holland. And so what I'm going to do in this video is just look at Mark Rutte's horoscope and what is happening to him at the moment. Now, you could say he's a symbolic figure, so does it really matter what is happening to him astrologically? Does his solar return matter? Does his converse solar return, his solar arc directions, is this telling us anything about NATO? Well, I would have said it probably was, because as symbolic leader, there is a sort of spiritual tie between him and the organization, which comes into force on October the 1st. It's like the king and the land and it's the king. Charles III's horoscope is important for the UK because he's the king. It doesn't matter if he's just a constitutional monarch. It's just the fact that he is the symbolic leader. So in terms of understanding what's going on in NATO, certainly after October the 1st, it is useful to look at his horoscope. Even before October the 1st, what is going on in Mark Rutte's life? How excited is he to get this new job? And those are things I will be looking at today. But first of all, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for the day. And today is Friday, June the 28th, 2024. So the moon is moving into Aries. So you can see this. Here is a chart for today, set for noon, June the 28th, 2024, in New York. And you can see that the moon is at 4 degrees 12 Aries. Now, the moon moves into Aries, London time, at 9:52 in the morning. So that means that if you're in the Americas, moon moves into Aries really early. Really early in the morning. I mean, if you're in California, moon will move into Aries at 1:52 a.m. If you're on the East Coast, it will be 4:52 a.m. So from an American perspective, it's a complete moon in Aries day. From a West European perspective, well, 9:52 a.m. in London is pretty early. That's 10:52 a.m. in, I don't know, Paris or London or The Hague. And so in West Europe, you can pretty much regard it as a moon in Aries day, certainly from the late morning onwards. Now, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, then moon doesn't go into Aries until this evening, Friday evening. So for you, then, yeah, it's more a moon in Pisces day. In fact, for anywhere in sort of Eastern Asia. So there is a certain dependency here on your time zone. In terms of planetary aspects, we've had a lot. We've had a few days where not a great deal has been going on, and I think this inaction does continue. The moon makes a conjunction with Neptune just before it moves into Aries. So that Moon-Neptune conjunction, which you're probably going to feel the most if you're in East Asia, Australia or New Zealand, but I think we're all going to feel it to an extent. Moon conjunct Neptune, there could be like a final blast of emotion. And the moon will, of course, be on Skeet, that fixed star connected with disasters and shipwrecks. And so that will emphasize the fact that Neptune is on Skeet. Neptune is about to go retrograde on this fixed star. So with that moon conjunct Neptune, we will start to see a fair amount of chaos, a time to be being very careful with water. Don't do anything dangerous with water. So particularly if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it may not be a good day for swimming. I suppose from a sort of perhaps a British prejudicial perspective, when we think about Australia and swimming, I suppose we just think about sharks. But I actually read somewhere that the most dangerous animal in Australia, I mean, we always think about Australia and dangerous animals, don't we? But I read somewhere that the most dangerous animal in Australia in terms of animal causing deaths is actually horses, or is it bees? So it's kind of actually the same as everywhere else, horses and bees. So that's not just unique to Australia, is it? But I've never been to Australia, so I haven't had any direct interaction with the wildlife. But no, if you're in Australia, it's probably a bad day for going to, or New Zealand, it's probably a bad day to go swimming or to go boating or something like that. So that's the moon. That's moon conjunct Neptune. After the moon moves into Aries, it makes a sextile to Pluto and a sextile to the Sun and a sextile to Jupiter. In other words, I've got something wrong there. That's not right, is it? It makes a sextile to Pluto. Sorry, it makes a square to the... No, what have I got? Let me get this right. It makes a sextile to Pluto. It makes a square to the Sun. And it makes a sextile to Jupiter. So we've got Moon sextile Pluto. So Moon in Aries sextile Pluto gives us a fair amount of control. And we want to be assertive about it. We want to make an impression. And so, after all of the chaos of the moon in Pisces, things come together more. We can really make things happen, and we can create a certain amount of transformation there. It can happen. And this moon in Aries is also square the Sun in Cancer. So if you've got moon in Aries square the Sun in Cancer, there may be a sense that we're moving in two directions, that we've got two pulls on us. Moon in Aries is about taking the initiative. It's about making things happen. But the Sun in Cancer is more cautious. It is aware of the emotional reality. It's aware that we live in a complicated world. And so some of us might just want to hold back because things do feel a little complicated. But I don't think it's really a day for holding back, because the moon is now that it's in Aries, it's starting to make a conjunction to the North Node. And so moon conjunct the North Node in Aries is about the impulse to make things happen, but also the moral impulse. There's something that we feel that we need to do that won't wait. And the moon, having made a square to the sun, it makes a sextile to Jupiter. And that sextile to Jupiter, I would have said, is pretty fortunate. It allows us to take successful action without having to take huge risks. We'll just have the talent and the ability to just be successful and to make things happen in a way that doesn't cause total destruction. And this moon sextile Jupiter is going to be particularly strong if you are in the Americas. I think if you're in Europe, you may not really feel that moon sextile Jupiter until late this evening, or certainly this evening. And if you're in Australia and New Zealand, that moon sextile Jupiter is really more about tomorrow. So that's a broad geocentric picture. From a heliocentric perspective, let's just see what's going on. There are the heliocentric planets. Remember, this puts the Earth at the center. The Sun at the center of the solar system. There are two main aspects. Firstly, the Earth is moving to a square with Mars. I've been talking about this pretty much every day. This Earth square Mars, which is getting stronger and stronger. And, it is about assertion. It's feeling that there's something wrong, perhaps, with the planet Earth or our little corner of the planet Earth. And perhaps we want to do something about it. And it kind of connects with the fact that from a geocentric perspective, the moon is now in Aries. So that's the first aspect. The second aspect is an opposition between Mercury and Saturn. You can see this here. There's Mercury, 12 Virgo, Saturn, 13 Pisces. So with Mercury making this opposition to Mercury opposition Saturn, that does mean that there could be some serious thinking required. We don't see this geocentrically. Something feels as if it's not quite right. It's a little bit disturbing, and it does need some serious thought. And that's not just about us. It's about the world at large. And it may just be a realization that something is not working, that we somehow have hit an obstacle. And, when we hit obstacles, what do? Okay, sometimes we try to deal with the obstacle. That's a mature thing to do. But many of us, when we hit an obstacle, we complain or we blame someone else. That's certainly what Mercury opposition Saturn can do. Saturn is quite a harsh planet, or it can be. So with Mercury opposition Saturn, we can say things which may not be particularly pleasant. And really, we're saying it out of frustration. And so, we have to be careful what we say. All of us have to be careful what we say. And at the same time, we should watch what people are saying on a political level. Because I do think the heliocentric chart is impersonal, is about collective forces, and it is what politicians are communicating. And there just may be a certain sense of hopelessness with this Mercury opposition Saturn. I must emphasize, I'm not talking about it from a personal perspective. It's more a wider collective perspective. We feel, or society feels, that there's nothing that can be done, that at the very least, we're going to have to go through a certain amount of pain. Maybe we need to be frugal. Mercury opposition Saturn is communicating the concept of frugality, that maybe the money isn't available. And this might be reflected in election campaigns. We've got election campaigns in France, and we've also got them in the UK. And of course, the United States. Hold on, United States. We've got the debate, haven't we? I have talked about the debate in the past. I'm not going to be talking about the debate between Biden and Trump today. So yeah, I did do it in a previous video, but with that debate between Biden and Trump having at Mercury opposition Saturn, you can see that is sort of harsh words. The words don't come out properly. So it'd be interesting to see how that Mercury opposition Saturn actually manifests. So that's the heliocentric picture, and now I'm going to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, June the 28th, 2024. Aries, things are changing. The moon is moving out of Pisces into Aries. And I think Aries, this is a big relief. You have felt recently that you haven't been able to do much. You've perhaps been concerned about Mars being in Taurus. Mars is your ruler in Taurus. It's just been hard work. Things have been slower than usual, and perhaps you haven't been your normal self. But with the moon moving into Aries, you could say that you are, to an extent, getting your power back. So if there's something you want to do, then maybe you can now go and do it. And the moon is actually in mixed reception with Mars. This is because the moon in Aries is in Mars's sign. Mars rules Aries. And Mars is in Taurus, which is a sign in which the moon is exalted. So we've got this mixed reception between moon and Mars, which I think puts you in a strong position. And if there's something you feel you need to do, then now might be your chance. And so in most cases, I would suggest that you don't hold back. And if there's something that seems rigid, it just seems to be there all the time, something that seems to be restricting your freedom of action, then you are now in a position to create some kind of transformation. After all, the moon makes a sextile aspect to Pluto. So this transformation does not have to be violent. You just have to do what feels right, explain yourself, and I think that people will listen and you're going to get the changes that you feel are really necessary. And you will be helped by the fact that the moon is starting to make a sextile to Jupiter. So in fact, what we've got is we've got the moon in Aries on the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint. And that's going to allow you to improve the world around you. You have a vision about the way things should be, and you want to be able to move towards that vision. And I do believe that that is something you really can do. So Aries, do take advantage of the situation. Of course, in order to get the full blast of moon in Aries, you kind of have to be in the Americas or Western Europe. If you're in Australia and New Zealand, you might feel somewhat left out. But don't worry, the moon is going to move into Aries. The moon is going to make that sextile aspect to Jupiter. It just may not happen until tomorrow. So overall, Aries, I think it's a day when you are powerful, and if things annoy you, then you need to do something about it. And that Earth square Mars, which I was talking about when looking at the heliocentric picture, it is getting stronger and stronger. Mars is your ruler. Earth is square Mars. So there's just something around you, in the world around you, that just bothers you. And as every day passes, it bothers you even more. And with the moon sextile Pluto, you finally get a chance to actually start to think about how you're going to deal with the matter. And I think you really can deal with the matter, but in such a way that doesn't compromise you or doesn't cause too much aggression or aggravation. Another point, Aries, is that with the moon moving into your sign, if you feel that something needs to be done, like today, right now, and you just get this feeling that won't go away, that it just has to be done now. Perhaps someone is in trouble or someone needs help and you don't really want to help them. You can't be bothered. It feels like too much of an effort. It might be embarrassing. It's probably a good idea to act sooner rather than later. Of course, within reason. I'm not asking you to do anything dangerous or which is going to totally embarrass you, but I think consider the possibility that there is an impulse here, not just today, but tomorrow as well, to intervene. And from a moral perspective, it might actually be the right thing to do. Taurus. The moon is changing sign from Pisces into Aries. Now, on the surface, the moon changing sign is not such a good thing, because moon in Aries, from a Taurian perspective, moon in Aries, doesn't really work tremendously well. It's, when the moon is in Aries, many Taurians feel that they have to head for the hills. They have to get away from the fray and perhaps keep a low profile, maybe. But the thing is, the moon, when it moves into Aries, is in Mars's sign. Mars rules Aries, and Mars is in your sign, and it's in Mars in Taurus is actually in the exaltation sign of the moon. So we have a mixed reception between the moon and Mars involving your sign. And that moon is sextile Pluto, and that Pluto in turn is in a high profile sector of your chart. So if we put this all together, we get the sense of Taurus being able to bring to bear hidden resources. People may have underestimated you. They may have thought that you weren't really in a strong position, or you weren't really in the mood to do anything, that they could discount you. Well, they'd be wrong. And I really do think that today, Taurus, you can really make things happen. And anyone that underestimates you might have cause for regret. But the question is, how do you best assert yourself? It's not a day for being super direct and for drawing loads of attention to yourself for no reason at all. I think in many cases, Taurus, you can do things which are actually quite secretive. You don't have to say what's on your mind. And ideally, you should avoid giving signals. Sometimes Taurians can wear their hearts on their sleeves. Sometimes they can reveal their feelings and their intentions through their body language, through their silences as well as through their words. So somehow Taurus, if you possibly can, you should try to go into stealth mode. Consider your body language. How you are expressing yourself, how people might be picking up on it, and somehow make the effort to be unseen, just in the background. You don't have to be noticed. If you feel that you're being ignored, for example, don't worry about it. You should be happy if you feel that you're being ignored, because when you're being ignored, when no one is noticing you, you are at your strongest. And as I've said, you have enormous reserves of power which are waiting to be expressed. And I think you can really bring these reserves of power to bear. And at first, people will not notice what's happening. You will just quietly get on with the job, do what you feel is necessary, and then at a certain stage, it'll be absolutely clear what you've managed to achieve. Now, this could be, about many different things, though it could have financial implications because the moon makes a sextile aspect to Jupiter. Now, this sextile aspect with Jupiter today is stronger if you are in the Americas. You'll get it a little bit in Europe, but if you're an American Taurean, you really do feel this moon sextile Jupiter. And that this moon sextile Jupiter may allow you to do things behind the scenes which could benefit you financially. You might have a piece of financial luck that just seems to come from nowhere. Now, if you do see that something goes your way financially, if you do get a break financially, I would suggest that in most cases you don't talk about it. Because if you start talking about it, you might in some respects spoil your luck. And so that's further evidence today that maybe the less said, the better. Gemini. From a heliocentric view, there is an opposition between Mercury and Saturn. And I think this does matter. Mercury is your ruler, and its opposition Saturn. And this kind of contradicts the geocentric view, or okay, maybe it complements it. Recently Mercury was trine Saturn. And, I was very optimistic about this Mercury trine Saturn. In fact, this Mercury trine Saturn, geocentrically, it's still in operation. Mercury is only 4 degrees off the trine of Saturn, so that does give you a certain sense of discipline and focus. But now we've got the heliocentric opposition between Mercury and Saturn coming in. That could represent some hurdles. You might become aware of something and realize that it might not be good news. It's something that could restrict your freedom of action. And whatever it is, it's not just affecting you, because this is a heliocentric opposition. Now, heliocentric aspects have a more collective nature. It may be that you start to become aware of what is happening in the world, what governments are doing, how the rules are changing, and also, I suppose, how the economy is changing. And with Mercury opposition Saturn, if you really think hard about it, you will perhaps start to see that your freedom of action is being restricted, or at least that's how it might feel. So your first impulse may actually be to be quite negative with Mercury making this heliocentric opposition to Saturn. But really, you should feel honoured to have this knowledge. Knowledge is power, and Geminis of all people should know that knowledge is power. You can see the way things are going. Other people may miss it, but as a Gemini, you can see it. You can see what's going to happen in 6 months' time. You can see how the external conditions are going to change. And so because you have this knowledge, you are now in a position to actually do something about it. And this goes back to privilege. the privilege of being a Gemini, the privilege of being able to benefit from this knowledge of the way things are happening. Yeah, some might say you're thinking too much, but I don't think you're thinking too much. I don't even think you're worrying too much, though don't allow your worries to spiral out of control. There is no point in having a worry if you don't do anything about it. And I just really must emphasize, you are seeing what could impact you, but you're also seeing what could impact everyone else. And so, Gemini, if you're clever, you're going to prepare yourself. And in the long term, you may actually be giving yourself an advantage, perhaps even a competitive advantage. Now, that Mercury opposition Saturn heliocentrically, it's not the only thing going on today. The moon is moving into Aries. And having a moon in Aries from a Gemini perspective, it's nice. You need a bit of fire. Geminis, can think too much, and having that fire makes you think that, yeah, things can happen. And you can, I think, benefit from other people. Other people, your friends, colleagues, associates, they are a resource. And a lot of people are on really good form. So do take advantage of their company. They really do have a lot to offer, and they give you the excitement that is just really important to you, particularly now. And it's just make sure that you don't allow mundane issues to spoil the show unless it's really necessary. I say that because the moon does make a square to the sun, and that square between the moon and the sun could be a particular issue if you're in the Americas. And it just may be that you're trying to have fun, you're trying to enjoy other people's company, but suddenly some annoying material or financial issue crops up, and that sort of spoils the day. So if possible, maybe you should steer clear of financial issues if you can. Although I understand sometimes you can't avoid financial issues. And it's not just the fact there's a moon square sun, it's just that this heliocentric opposition between Mercury and Saturn just makes you aware of material realities all the time. Another aspect, again an aspect that you're going to feel most if you're in the Americas, is a sextile between the moon and Jupiter. And the Jupiter is in your sign, it's working its magic through your sign, and with the moon sextile Jupiter, it could be lucky. And particularly this evening, if you're in the Americas, there might be some kind of meeting, an interaction with another person that could have fortunate implications. I mean, it may be that an opportunity suddenly makes itself felt, or it may just be about having a good time. Moon sextile Jupiter. Cancer. The moon is changing sign. It starts a day in Pisces, ends a day in Aries, though it does depend to an extent on your time zone. Now, I'm just going to start off by looking at the situation if you're in Australia and New Zealand, because it is different from the rest of the world. So if you're in Australia and New Zealand and East Asia, the Philippines, Japan, Eastern Russia, in fact, a lot of Asia, in fact, then you're not going to feel the moon moving into Aries. The moon is essentially going to be in Pisces all day. And the moon will be in Pisces and it will be conjunct Neptune. And so with the moon conjunct Neptune, it's actually not a time for taking the initiative. because I'm telling everyone else to take the initiative, particularly the Cancerians in America and Europe, time to really make things happen, but not you, not quite yet. It's a time to reflect, and it's a time to understand, with the moon making a conjunction to Neptune, that you could get confused. There are things you don't fully understand. So if you were to take the initiative, if you were to act, remember I'm talking about East Asian, Australians, New Zealanders who who are Cancerians. If you were to take the initiative, it just wouldn't work, I don't think. It is better to reflect. If you reflect and try to work out what's going on, tune into your feelings, then I think you'll be fine. And you might gain some very important insights. So perhaps you should focus more on the spiritual side of things than the material side of things. Yeah, if you are in Australia or New Zealand and Eastern Asia, Philippines, for example, or Japan or China, or certainly Eastern China. So if you are not in that part of the world, if you are in the Americas or Western Europe, it's a completely different picture. The moon is moving into Aries. And from a Cancerian perspective, Aries is a high-profile sign. And it's, of course, a sign that is about action. You've done your reflecting. Okay, the Cancerians in Australia are still doing their reflecting, but you've finished with your reflecting now. And it's time to make things happen. And, we've got this moon square sun today. Now, moon square sun can be difficult in many cases because, it's a square, and moon in Aries square sun in Cancer. Aries and Cancer don't fit together very well. But for you, Cancer, that moon square sun, I think, is really good because, sun is in your sign. Moon is making a dynamic aspect to the sun. So, Cancer, you can actually make things happen in a big way. And I don't think it's a problem that your emotions and your desire for action are somehow dynamically connected with each other. For other signs, action and emotion may be conflicting, but not for you. You know exactly what needs to be done, and your emotions will actually help guide you towards the target, whatever that target might be. And so I'm really optimistic, Cancer, that you can really make things happen. And it is the right thing to do. The moon is starting to make a conjunction with the North Node. North Node is in Aries, remember. And the North Node is what you're supposed to be doing. And what you're supposed to be doing is making yourself seen and heard. People need to know what you're doing. People need to know what you want. You need to make an appearance. And if things aren't right, or if anyone is doing something wrong, then you need to tell them. It's a time for showing your charisma and your leadership, and I suppose it's also about taking responsibility. And you will certainly be guided by your feelings and your ambition, and you will be helped by a sextile aspect between the moon and Pluto. The Pluto represents those deep forces deep in your unconscious that sometimes, or indeed very often, you don't bring to the surface. But today, Cancer, remember, American, West European, Cancerian, with that moon sextile Pluto, I really think that you can make things happen. Okay, West European Cancer, in fact, European Cancerians, African Cancerians, I think at some stage during a day, you can bring that moon in Aries energy to bear. And so be ambitious. It just really is important. And that's my view of Cancer. Just remember, it is a divided reading for Cancer. I think that the situation for Cancer, if you're in Australia and New Zealand, is very different from if you're in the Americas and Europe, and probably Africa as well. Leo, you think that you understand things, and you think that you are an authority, and that now is a time when you can establish your authority. Now, you may be right, but you do have to be slightly careful. There seem to be a few things, Leo, that you haven't fully understood. And if you were to assume that you knew all the answers, then you might get it wrong. And if you were to assume that you had the right to tell people what to do because you knew the answers, then there is a danger that you could embarrass yourself. So, Leo, if you are in a position where you're able or inclined to give orders, to tell people what to do, I would think very carefully about it. Ask yourself, do you know what you're talking about? And if you've got any doubts, just do some research. You might think that you know something, you'd seen it before, you'd looked it up before, but do you know it? And so if you're going to really make a big impression, if you feel that's what you need to do, just before you do that, just spend 10 seconds looking something up. Just 10 seconds making sure that you've got it right. And in many cases, I think that you'll find that you actually haven't got it right. You may not have got it completely wrong, but there just may be some details that you haven't fully appreciated. Now, having said all that, I'm not saying that it's a bad day. In fact, it's quite a good day because the moon is moving into Aries. Okay, if you're in Australia and New Zealand, it goes into Aries very late in the day. But in general, that is something to look forward to because the moon has been in Pisces for a long time, a couple of days. And, with the moon in Pisces, you haven't felt yourself to be you, not your normal self. You've been too introspective. You've had feelings that didn't feel very useful, and it just was really difficult to make things happen. But with the moon moving into Aries, you just feel a new energy, a new spark, a new ability to make things happen. And I think that is good. But remember what I said right at the beginning. Don't assume that you have all the answers. And in many respects with the moon in Aries, it's a time for discovery and for exploration. That's you doing the discovery and exploration. You don't have to engage other people. You don't have to tell people what to do. Because in a way, you're not really in a position to tell people what to do. You have to be sure of your facts, and you have to discover new facts. And you need to center yourself. But just remember, facts on their own are of limited value. They won't move you on. They won't create wonderful transformations. You have to have a broad set of principles. The facts are there simply to inform the larger principles. And so don't rush to judgment. Wait. see how things are coming together. And in that way, you can get a sense of philosophical and perhaps spiritual anchoring. And the moon, while it's moving through Aries, the first few degrees of Aries, it does make a sextile to Pluto. And that sextile to Pluto may be about change coming through another person. So Pluto has been in Aquarius for some time, and it will stay in Aquarius for a very long time, although it does briefly leave Aquarius and move into Capricorn, I think in the autumn. But it doesn't stay in Capricorn for very long. But right now it is in Aquarius. And so Aquarius is your opposite sign, and that can represent change coming through another person. And so with Moon sextile Pluto, one meeting can create a change of perspective. One conversation, doesn't matter who it's with. Someone may just point something out to you, just a stranger. Just one little thing changes everything. So be open to that possibility, and you certainly shouldn't be thinking that there's only one way of being. And with that sextile between the moon and Pluto, something can just move you on. And I think in many respects you do have to be moved on. And that is another reason why you shouldn't be telling people what to do. Really, the flow of information, and the flow of knowledge, the flow of inspiration should be moving towards you, not away from you. You should be right now a receiver rather than a transmitter. If you want to be a transmitter, then just wait a bit, wait a few days. Maybe by the weekend things will change. But right now, you're there to learn in the main rather than to teach. That's good, isn't it? You don't want to be static. I know you're a fixed sign, Leo. You can get static. You can get stuck in your ways. And, perhaps that's in a way what has happened when you had the moon in Pisces. The moon didn't really work very well in Pisces. You were having to sort of focus too much on your own feelings, and you weren't really able to be particularly dynamic. But now things are opening up, and things really are, I think, starting to move. Virgo. Mercury is opposition Saturn from a heliocentric perspective. And this opposition between Mercury and Saturn may have an impact on you. I'm not saying it need to have a big impact on you, but it can have some impact on you. And it's perhaps about taking the world more seriously. So Mercury heliocentrically, when it makes that opposition to Saturn, you find yourself having to ask questions. Things that perhaps you thought were obvious are actually not obvious at all. And you may then have a few uncertainties. We're always going to feel uncertain if something that we took for granted is suddenly not obvious anymore, is maybe even under threat. But don't worry about it. It's not personal. I was saying the same thing to Gemini, because Mercury, rules Gemini. It also rules Virgo. So with this Mercury opposition Saturn, you're becoming aware of stuff that other people are not aware of, and you're having to make some changes, or you should be making changes. But being a Virgo, I do think that is something you can do, especially now with the moon moving into Aries. With the moon moving into Aries, Virgoans are able to ask deep and searching questions. They're able to move their minds in places which other people, are afraid to tread. where is it? Virgo minds move into places where angels are afraid to tread. Yeah, you're able to ask those questions. And, they are important questions. And asking these questions might not make you happy, but at least, Virgo, you will know that you are doing something useful, and that you're in territory that other people aren't touching. And actually, this does give you quite a lot of power. Your power is not obvious today. Not least because you don't really want to assert it. Nonetheless, it's there. Especially if you're in the Americas, because the moon is starting to make a sextile to Jupiter. In fact, I think in Europe as well, and Africa, not Australia or New Zealand. That's more about tomorrow. But the moon is making the sextile to Jupiter. Jupiter is in Gemini. Jupiter is in a part of your chart relating to success and status, and with the moon sextile Jupiter, you're able to make the most of what you have. And I'm thinking particularly in terms of knowledge and insights. Your knowledge and insights are informing you, and they are allowing you to create fortunate change, because the moon is making a sextile to Pluto and it's making a sextile to Jupiter. So we could say that the moon is on the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint. And so with the moon on a Jupiter-Pluto midpoint, your strength and your insights and your emotional power are going to all come together, and you can certainly improve yourself and probably make actually quite a powerful impact on the world around you. So on the surface, Virgo, it might feel like a difficult day, or at least a boring day, when things just don't seem to be happening. But the moment you start to apply yourself, the moment you start to take on the day, regarding this day as being a challenge or a mission. So if you start to have a mission-orientated approach to the day, then you will start to get results. And I think part of it is because you're going to feel some pressure. Things aren't going to be easy. If things were easy, you would just fly through the day and nothing would happen. But because there's pressure, constant pressure today, that means you are having an impact. So in a way, the harder things are, the more of a struggle it is today, then the more of an impression you're making. So in that sense, whether or not it's a good or a bad day kind of depends on you. If you just try to relax and you don't apply yourself, you take the view, maybe it's Friday, you're just waiting for the weekend. If you take that kind of approach to today, then actually it might be pretty miserable. But on the other hand, if you really push yourself all the way, take every opportunity to push yourself, then it'll be a great day. In fact, of all the 12 signs, I think Virgo could have the best day of them all. So Virgo, you've got a choice. It can be a 1-star day, it can be a 5-star day. It's up to you. Libra. The moon is moving into Aries, and that is an important change. The moon has been in Pisces for some time, and with the moon in Pisces, Libra, you might have felt that there were just things you had to do, and there was no way out of them, and perhaps you were dealing with a set of tasks where you weren't really sure what you were supposed to be doing, but you had to do something, and you were trying to work it all out, and it was all a bit difficult, all a bit chaotic. But now things are changing. The moon is moving out of Pisces into Aries, and I think you'll enjoy the changeover. The changeover starts to put the emphasis onto you and your relationship with the outside world, and certain people may become important, and sure, you're going to be aware that there are limits to your independence. We all have limits to our independence, and I think that today you're going to be aware that what other people do does have an impact on you. Though I should say, how you experience today does to an extent depend on where you are. The moon doesn't move into Aries until this evening if you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia. So that changeover to an extent does depend on where you are. But still, at some stage in the day for all of us, the moon is going to move into Aries. And with the moon in Aries, you perhaps recognize that on your own, there is actually a bit of a limit to what you can achieve. You do need help. And if you need help, you mustn't be afraid to ask for it. And indeed, that is what you're supposed to be doing. So consider today, Libra, what is the most important task? What really matters today? And then ask yourself, can you do it on your own? Then I think you'll realize you can't entirely do it on your own. Or even if you can do it on your own, you're not going to be able to do a really good job. So get the help you need. Maybe it's just advice. But whatever it is, I do think that help and advice will be forthcoming. And as the moon moves into Aries, it makes a sextile aspect to Pluto, and it also starts making a sextile aspect to Jupiter. And so with the moon aspecting Jupiter and Pluto, then you are going to be able to really make things happen and improve the situation, not just for yourself, but for other people. So it may be that when you ask people for help, it's a situation where you can say to them, the reason you need to help me is because through your actions you can help everyone else. It's like people needing to have a collective view. We're not alone. If people don't work together, then nothing happens. And perhaps that is what you're supposed to be doing. The moon is making a conjunction to a North Node in Aries. Okay, that conjunction isn't really around. It isn't exact until tomorrow, but it's still quite close to the North Node, as the North Node is supposed to be where we're going to. And so perhaps part of what you're supposed to be doing today is you're supposed to be bringing people together around some kind of common goal where everyone can help each other. I know it's a big challenge, but I think it's a challenge that you are probably up to. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, that might be a challenge for tomorrow, but don't worry, it will happen. So that's one aspect of what's happening today. Now, from a perspective of your career, if career matters, or business, or your work, whatever you're doing in terms of work, if you are working, of course I understand you may be retired or not working, but if you happen to be working, then I think that this moon moving into Aries is also important, because it's just a reminder that in order to achieve your ambitions, whether they, it could be long-term ambitions or even just short-term ambitions, what you're trying to do today on Friday. Maybe you're not doing anything after Friday, and tomorrow's the weekend. But whatever you're trying to do today, you can't fully do it on your own. And so getting support from another person really is going to matter. And also it may be that you need to get a push from another person, because the moon is in Aries, and Aries is quite an assertive, dynamic sign, and so moon in Aries might be an assertive, dynamic person who encourages you to do something that you weren't actually planning on doing. And if you find yourself being pushed in this way, you might be a bit annoyed. You had your own way of working, your own way of doing things, and you just get annoyed when you're being told to do something you don't fully want to do. But I think you need good humor here, and you need to really try to understand why you're being pushed. And I think you might find that it's all for the best. So it's just important to be fairly open-minded. Though, having said that, authority figures today can be troublesome. So if you deal with authority figures, particularly people who have a lot of power, not just a bit of power, but a lot of power, those kind of people, if you have anything to do with them, may actually have motives that should perhaps be questioned. So yeah, it's good to be pushed a bit, to be told to do something, because you can see why it's necessary if you're really honest with yourself. But if someone starts showing a great deal of power, and they really start to push you around and really start to, tell you what's right, what's wrong, then do question their motives. Because there are a few people around today who have motives which are not good. They may be motivated by the simple desire for personal gain, and that's not good. And in certain situations, they may be motivated by something even worse, something really base, almost to the point of immorality and criminality. I mean, that is an extreme situation, but I don't think that you should entirely exclude it. I don't want to make you paranoid. I mean, these things happen all the time. I'm, as an astrologer, just my job is to look at the things from the worst possible perspective. At least that's how I see it. I mean, there's no point in being ridiculously optimistic just for the sake of it, just to make people happy. One needs to look at worst possible scenarios. I think that's much better than looking at best possible scenarios. But maybe that's just the way I am. I mean, I do take the view that astrology is a fairly saturnine profession. So, broadly speaking, that's the day. There are some challenges. A bit of pressure from outside is a good thing, but if there's too much pressure, if someone is really trying to throw their weight around, then I think you have to ask some questions. Scorpio. The moon is now moving into Aries, and that does change things a little for Scorpios. Things are maybe, in some ways, not quite as easy as they used to be. You may realize that something that you thought was going to be easy is actually going to be hard work, and you have to perhaps ask yourself whether it's really worth it. You've tried something, you've had some ideas, and now you're starting to see the reality of the situation. And I think it's a day, Scorpio, when you need to think about time, in the sense of how much time is something going to take in order to complete it. And is it going to be time that you're going to have to expend not just today, but on a regular basis? And you may actually reach a conclusion that you're starting to commit yourself to something that is frankly not realistic. I mean, I hope that you can be honest with yourself. There is a real danger, I should say, that some Scorpios are going to be naive. I mean, naive is a word you never want to use with a Scorpio, but Scorpio, you might find that you do commit yourself to things. You tell people, yes, you can do it. Perhaps you're being pressurized. You want to make people happy. You volunteer without knowing really what you're volunteering for or to. And when the reality happens, when you realize what you committed yourself to, you'll then realize that you've made a big mistake. So, Scorpio, I would say that today is not a day for making offers. Or, when I say offer, I don't mean offers on property or those kind of offers, but offering to do things, volunteering to do things, signing up to things. It's not that kind of day, because, to be honest, I don't think that you have all the facts, and that's what you need to do. You need to collect the facts. You need to really work out what you're letting yourself into, and you're not going to be able to work that out today. You need time, and if you are being pressurized to do something, you've got to, at the very least, say, wait. You're not ready to make a big decision. So that's one thing going on today. So do be careful. And at the same time, the Earth is moving towards a square with Mars. And this square between Earth and Mars has been getting closer and closer and closer for the last few days. It's now within less than a degree. And so with Earth square Mars, there could be things that you actually find rather annoying. When you look at the world out there, and when you look at what people are doing, and perhaps the way they're treating their environment or treating each other, that's going to make you angry. And I think that also fits in with the fact that the Mars is in Taurus, is in your opposite sign. There are people who are just going to be behaving in a way which is just frankly unreasonable, and you then have to decide what is the best way to deal with the problem. I don't think you have to, but again, you don't have to make decisions. But of course, at the same time, you just don't want to just be angry for the sake of it, just sit there getting annoyed. I think that instead, what you need to do is just perhaps engage in some careful planning. Scorpios are good at planning. You don't have to write anything down. You can just sit there. You can seem to be sitting there like a statue or whatever, but still, the cogs are working, and you are making plans. And with the Moon making a sextile to Pluto and a sextile to Jupiter, you are working on improving the situation all the time. And it's hard work, perhaps, even if it's just your brain clicking away. But the details are starting to form, and I think that perhaps over the weekend you'll have a clearer sense of purpose. But right now, I don't think there's much that actually needs to be done. Sagittarius, you're feeling, I think, a lot more optimistic. You just feel that things finally are starting to move. Last couple of days might have seemed that everything was a bit stuck, but finally things are happening, and I think that you're going to be a lot more positive, and you can start to see possibilities where maybe yesterday or the day before you just may have seen a set of dead ends, but the dead ends are now clearing, the roadblocks are clearing, and you can start to be yourself, and be normal, happy-go-lucky Sagittarius. Okay, I won't say quite happy-go-lucky. One should never be happy-go-lucky in this complicated world in which we live. You have the ability to impress. The moon is, after all, making a sextile to Jupiter. Jupiter's your ruler. Moon is in Aries, a fire sign. You are a fire sign. So with moon sextile Jupiter, yeah, you can impress people and you can bring to bear your fire. And I think it is going to be very much appreciated. Though you may have to cut through some negativity. It's not your negativity. It's other people's negativity. Some people are being negative. I mean, it's because of this opposition aspect between Mercury and Saturn. Remember, it's a heliocentric opposition between Mercury and Saturn. And because of this opposition between Mercury and Saturn, now some people are just going to be feeling very sorry for themselves. They're going to feel they can't get anything done. That it's not their fault, that the world is against them, and there's no point. It's just all a waste of time. That is a possibility. And that's what you're dealing with. But I really think, Sagittarius, that right now, with that moon making a sextile aspect to Jupiter, you can really make things happen, and you can cheer people up, and you can provide an alternative reality. Some people might be thinking there's only one way things can move, but actually, Sagittarius, you know that there are several ways in which things can move, and you can show people the way forward. So, in a way, Sagittarius, you have a little bit of responsibility there to indeed make things happen. And with this moon in Aries, it makes a sextile aspect to Pluto, and it makes a sextile aspect to Jupiter, as I've just been describing. So we can say that the moon is on the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint. Now, recently, I don't know, over the last couple of weeks, I have been talking about self-improvement, improving yourself as a Sagittarian theme, because Jupiter was trine Pluto. So Jupiter, that trine between Jupiter and Pluto, is now separating. But the fact that the moon is sextile Jupiter, sextile Pluto, means that trine between the Jupiter and Pluto is starting to reform. The energy of that trine is hitting you again. And I therefore think that you should not be satisfied with the way you are, even if things are really good, because things could be even better. And I think you just need to recognize that. However good things are, things could be better. On the other hand, if you feel that things are grim, I suppose not every Sagittarian is having a great time. Statistically, there's got to be some Sagittarians who have got something to worry about. Don't worry about it too much. And with Mercury heliocentrically making an opposition to Saturn, don't let other people undermine your confidence. That is a slight danger. People close to you, partners, maybe, business partners, I suppose it could be romantic partners, just people undermining your confidence, or just complaining so much that you just can't see the way forward. You've got to be tough when dealing with that. It's a day for being positive, and I don't think you want to put up with other people's negativity. You need to be able to counter it. So if someone says that things are difficult, that things are bad, it's perhaps not just enough to say, no, they're not. You have to come up with reasons why things are good and things are really going to happen. And don't allow your own negativity to spoil the party. I suppose there could be some residual negativity because, the moon in Aries does make a square to a sun in Cancer. So I suppose there's a possibility that your own doubts spoil things. But I think those doubts will be triggered by what other people are saying. So do not put up with negativity. It does need to be challenged. Now, one final point. If you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, then you don't really feel the moon in Aries energy until tomorrow. And what may be more important is the fact that there's moon conjunct Neptune in Pisces. Remember, this is only for East Asian, Australia, New Zealand, Sagittarius. Sorry, Sagittarians. Yeah, I'm talking about Sagittarians living in Australia or New Zealand or the Philippines or Japan. Moon moves into Aries very late in the day, but the important aspect is a conjunction between the moon and Neptune in Pisces. And that conjunction between the moon and Neptune may be a little bit dangerous in the sense that you may be distracted and your focus may not be very good, and you have to be particularly careful with water. Not a good time to get swimming, not a good time to be playing games with a plumbing system. And so, if you've got anything dangerous going on with water or could be dangerous with water, then perhaps leave it for another day or call in an expert. And on a positive note, with moon conjunct Neptune, it's a time to focus on your feelings and your vibes and your spirituality. Maybe a time for meditation or prayer, getting in touch with some higher being. But it's not actually anything you necessarily have to do. That can maybe wait until late this evening, or ideally perhaps until tomorrow. Capricorn. You have a certain objectivity today, and I think that's good. A lot of people are worrying about this and worrying about that and getting really emotional about things, but not you. I think that you're able to have a certain mental distance. You realize that nothing is so important that you need to panic or do anything dramatic. And I think that this distance, is really useful. I mean, some people might find it infuriating that, you refuse to get angry about things. Your words are perhaps quite measured, and I think that what you can really be here is, you can be a calming influence. All these people just wanting action right now, you've seen it all before, and you just understand that it's probably unnecessary. And, with the moon moving into Aries, from a Capricorn view, Aries it's a pretty low profile sign. It's at the bottom of your chart. And so for many Capricorns, it may just feel that the weekend has arrived early. There's nothing actually that has to be done. Sure, there's going to be pressure to do things because, the moon is making a square to the sun. Sun is in Cancer. Cancer is in your opposite sign. So there may be some people who are telling you to do things, particularly if you're a Capricorn in the Americas. Maybe there's pressure to do something on Friday night. But really, is it necessary? I don't think it is. So you ideally should just have a quiet day. Yeah, there are a few things that need to be sorted out, but nothing particularly dramatic. And yeah, I do understand that some people might find that infuriating. And I suppose that links in with the fact that there's this heliocentric aspect between Mercury and Saturn. So looking at that heliocentric opposition, well, it's actually an opposition between Mercury and Saturn. Saturn represents you, and it's your own approach. It's a way you're dealing with things on a mental level. And I just think that on a mental level, you want to downplay things, and you're not going to get excited. And so if people have ideas, which they are very excited about, they want to do stuff, and they tell you about it, you'll just you'll just say something like, well, that's fine, but not show any great enthusiasm. And that gets a lot of criticism, not showing enthusiasm. We're supposed to show enthusiasm. We're supposed to tell people that they're wonderful, that their plans are great. You're not in the mood for showing enthusiasm. You just don't see the point. In fact, Capricorn, if one were to make a criticism today, maybe you're not being critical enough. I think you may have a certain inclination just to take things as they are. You want to do that, fine. Don't show any enthusiasm, but don't criticize. If people want to do that, okay. But maybe you should make a little bit of an effort to engage with what people are saying and planning. And I think if you actually engage with what they're doing and what they're saying, I think you might actually realize that things aren't right. And you may have to actually make the effort to be critical, to point to people and say, point out the errors of people's way. You'll do it in a very relaxed kind of way. You're not in the mood for getting angry. And sure, you might upset someone by not just showing a lack of enthusiasm, but just by showing some gentle criticism. But I think that's the right approach. Capricorns, they're the sensible ones. They're the ones that can be trusted to make sure that people don't do stupid things. You should be, in a way, the safety net. And if you're going to be everyone's safety net, you can't be entirely objective and non-committal. You have to, at certain times, be ready to call people out, even if it just seems like a load of effort, because I think that is, at the moment, that's your responsibility. Aquarius, you feel that things are getting better. It's not wonderfully exciting, but you can start to see some movement, and you perhaps are aware that there are things you can do now which you couldn't do yesterday. And it's not just about the external world and what obstacles you have to face. It's about the way you feel and what inspires you. I mean, if you're honest with yourself, you'll probably accept that recently you have not been particularly inspired. Yeah, you might have some ideas, but ideas on their own don't mean much. What you really needed was, a bit of fire. And now that fire is there. After all, the moon is in Aries, and the moon is making a sextile to Pluto. Pluto is, of course, at the beginning of your star sign, or ascendant sign or moon sign. That depends entirely how you are looking at these 12 sign readings. People always or very often ask me, are my 12 signs, are they for the sun or for the ascendant? Well, my general reply to that is it's kind of up to you. Traditionally, these 12 signs were for the sun, but now that everyone seems to know what their rising sign is, I think there are grounds for using the ascendant as well. So your sign, Pluto is at the beginning of your sign, and the moon is making a sextile to Pluto at the beginning of your sign. So that does give you a certain amount of power which you didn't have before, and also a sense of thinking that it's worth the effort. Recently it just hasn't felt as if it was worth the effort. Now it is worth the effort. And, with the moon in Aries, making that sextile to Pluto, the things you say can have an impression, and also the places you go to, the places you visit. I mean, I don't know what your plans are for today, but if you make some short visits, you go to different places, maybe you don't give people much warning, you just, I don't know, I suppose you could turn up on their doorstep. That depends on the situation. But if it's okay to turn up on someone's doorstep out of the blue, you could make a really good impression, and you could actually create change. And indeed, if something is not happening the way you would like it, it's just too slow, then actually making a physical visit could make a big difference. Okay, a phone call is another approach, but somehow a physical visit is going to be really powerful, because it is about short distance traveling. The moon in Aries from an Aquarian view, so a bit of short distance traveling can be very powerful. It might seem a waste of time, but if you're there in the flesh, right in front of someone, then I think that they will start to take you seriously. But don't feel that you need to get angry about anything. Anger is perhaps an issue with Moon in Aries, not just for you, but for everyone. Moon in Aries does have a reputation for being a little bit angry. You've got to be an Aquarian. Be objective. When you're saying things, don't give it too much power. Don't be in too much of a hurry. Don't give the impression that you care, even if you really care. I think that if you show that you really care about something, in a strange way today, you might be indicating your vulnerabilities. So by being objective and ever so slightly distant in the way you communicate, I think you will be making a good impression. That might sound strange and counterintuitive, but I think that's right. And also in the way you are thinking. When we think about something, we can get really angry, can't we? We can get annoyed. Things aren't right as our brain goes crazy. Again, just slow things down. Those thoughts need to be as slow as possible, and because that is the way to have a clear mind, and also to make a good impression. One aspect that is important today is actually a heliocentric aspect, and that is Mercury opposition Saturn. And Saturn is your ruler, and so Mercury opposition Saturn, there is a possibility today that you realize something or see something that you weren't expecting and is actually very challenging. You had some ideas about the way things should be. You thought you could predict what was going to happen today and tomorrow. Everything seemed in order, and then something happens, or you hear something, or you see something that changes everything. I don't mean that in a sense of a traumatic thing. This is a heliocentric aspect. It's more general from that. It's not necessarily even personal, but it just may be that you see something in the world that really hits you. I've talked about short distance traveling from an Aquarian view, And so perhaps if you're just traveling around your community and you just see something and you hadn't seen it before, or maybe you hadn't noticed it before, but now you see it or you notice it, it gets you. And you understand that something is not right. Not right with your community, not right with your society. And you can't get it out of your head. It's important not to take it personally, and I think that at the moment you're able not to take things personally, but it still hits you, and you then have to perhaps start to integrate it into your life and your expectations in a slow way. And I think this could actually in a way be fortunate, because perhaps what you're actually seeing is a fragment of the future. It was H.G. Wells. I think H.G. Wells wrote a book about the future, and he said that the future is all about archaeology. It's, we can see these artifacts, and they represent the future. We see this, and we see that, and we can slowly uncover the future. And so maybe what you're seeing, what seems to be disturbing you, is a sign of what's about to happen. And as an Aquarius, you are a very future-orientated sign. Pluto is in Aquarius. Okay, it does leave Aquarius briefly, but it will in the autumn, but it comes back into Aquarius and will be there for a long time. You are future-orientated, and what you see today is giving you a hint about the future, and perhaps this gives you a chance to prepare for the future. But I must emphasize, I'm not really talking about anything to do with you personally. It's more about the future of the society and the world in which you live. Pisces. There is less emphasis on Pisces today unless you happen to be in Australia and New Zealand. So I'll just quickly talk about Australia and New Zealand and East Asia, Philippines, Japan, and so forth. Because if you're in Australia and New Zealand, the moon is going to be in Pisces pretty much all day. And it's going to be making a conjunction to Neptune in Pisces. So if you are in those parts of the world, then that Moon-Neptune conjunction is going to make you, I think, quite sensitive to what's happening around you. You can pick things up very easily. Pick up emotions, vibes, whatever is swirling around you. So you'll be able to feel it, and if you've got any psychic abilities, they're going to be much stronger than usual, I think. So do take advantage of all your intuitions, but don't necessarily act on them. Just feel it. And I suppose ideally you'd be a little bit careful when dealing with other people, because you might give the wrong impression. Moon conjunct Neptune can be a bit of a smokescreen. You come over as, you give the impression that you're one person, but you're actually someone else. So there is some confusion there. So if you're trying to make yourself clear, then you do need to make a special effort. Don't make things complicated. Be really straightforward and down to earth. Also, that moon conjunct Neptune is conjunct Skeet. So if you are in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, there could be a time when that moon Neptune is conjunct when there could be a little bit of danger, perhaps from water. and don't do anything dangerous around water with that moon conjunct Neptune in Pisces. Now, if you are in Europe and if you're in the Americas, I think the emphasis is more on the moon in Aries. That moon conjunct Neptune is going to be very much of the past, and so we have the moon leaving Pisces, and with the moon in Aries, it may be a time when you need to give consideration to money and financial issues. There just may be things that need to be done financially. It's Friday, it's the end of a week, so perhaps there's a little bit of pressure there to make sure you get what's owed to you, for example. So if someone owes you money and you could, in theory, get that money today, well, get the money today. Don't wait until next week. Moon in Aries is impulsive. It's action orientated. And with the moon making a sextile to Jupiter, that does indicate financial good fortune, especially if you're in the Americas. But I think even if you're in Europe or Africa, I think you can pick up on that moon sextile Jupiter. So keep moving and don't doubt your ability to benefit yourself. And also don't doubt your own charisma and your own ability to make an impression. You are a powerful person, Pisces, and you know how to behave in such a way as to get people's attention. So that might also link with money. If you're trying to persuade someone to give you something or to give you what's owed to you, or maybe you're looking for a pay rise, or you're trying to negotiate some kind of payment for a piece of work, or maybe trying to negotiate a refund, your social skills are going to be extremely important. And with the right words, or perhaps even the right silences, you can, I think, make a really powerful impression. And at the same time, I think that you can also give yourself real security. So overall, Pisces, does depend where you are. I think that if you are in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, it is going to be a very different day than if you're in the Americas or Europe and Africa. So do bear that in mind. Now, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, don't worry. The moon is moving into Aries, and so a lot of what I said relating to America and Western Europe is going to apply to you tomorrow. That is a problem about doing these forecasts with people on different time zones. But anyway, Pisces, it looks like being an all-round good day, especially if you're in Western Europe, Africa, and the Americas. If something is owed to you, or you feel that it's owed to you, then I think there's a good chance that you can actually get it. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I'm now going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was number 57, the Gentle. So this hexagram, the Gentle, is about the wind. So you can see that top 3 lines, bottom 3 lines, we have a repeated trigram. A trigram represents 3 lines, so the top 3 lines are the same as the bottom 3 lines, and that trigram does represent the gentle and the wind. And it's the wind blowing through things. And it is the wind trying to work out what is going on. And it's suggestive that perhaps something is not entirely right, and we need to, if possible, uncover what is wrong. Because if we can get to the root of the matter, if we can clear out the problem, if the wind can rush through everything, then in theory things should be a lot better. And we have 3 moving lines, so we have quite a lot of moving lines here. There's a lot of action here. So the bottom line moves. So the question is, what does that mean? And we have contradictory advice. So I've looked at a couple of translations of the I Ching, and one piece of advice, the advice that Wilhelm's translation gives, is that actually we need to be decisive. There is a problem, and we need to make sure that we can sort it out. And that seems absolutely reasonable. But you could say that it's the bottom line moving. This really is at the beginning of the issue. It's too early to act. And an alternative approach is that maybe rather than being decisive, we should actually retreat, because the situation just is over our heads. We're not going to be able to deal with it. So what actually do we do? I think we have to make a judgment here. Can we handle it? It's all very well saying be decisive to start to tackle a problem, but do we actually have the resources and the strength of character in order to do that? And so you have to ask yourself, can you handle it? And if you can't handle it, or if you have self-doubt, then retreat might be the best approach. If, on the other hand, you feel that you're in a strong position, that you're ready to see it through, then go for it. What you don't want to do is be indecisive. You're faced with a problem and you're not sure what to do. Do you retreat? Do you go forward? And you just stay where you are. And that would be a recipe for disaster. That would be really problematic. So I think you're going to have to make a decision one way or another. You either take the thing head on or you turn back. Then the third line moves. And the third line is often not good. And with the third line, I think that we are actually dealing with an increasingly difficult and intractable problem. It doesn't seem that it's easy to get our way, and it's not easy to uncover what's really going on. We can try, but we might feel that we're just getting stuck, and in the end we might find that we're not getting any answers. We're seeing a problem, we're seeing the results of other people's mistakes and their inaction, but we're not getting anywhere nearer to the real solution to the problem. And then we move to the top line, and the top line is about asking too many questions. We actually are starting to get to the root of the problem. We get there in the end. But just because we've got to the root of a problem doesn't mean that we can actually solve the problem. Our first inclination might be to for example, confront someone. We know who's causing the problem. So we might think, oh, well, we're going to confront them and we're going to ask some questions and find out what's going on. That's not the right approach. If you get too close to the source of the issue, then it might actually be best to step back and just be satisfied with the fact that you know what the problem is without feeling that you want to solve it. Now, this hexagram, the gentle does move, and it moves to hexagram 60, which is limitation. And that is the advice. We mustn't have too many expectations, and at the same time, a bit of self-discipline may be necessary. Perhaps in the past we've been a bit sloppy. Maybe that's indicating the actual reason why something hasn't gone well, because perhaps we just haven't been careful enough. We've perhaps been too indulgent. And so limitation is certainly useful in terms of self-discipline, but the I Ching also advises that we don't go for over limitation. Limitation can't be such that it's actually painful. So, going back to the previous hexagram, it may actually be that the underlying reason why something hasn't gone right may not have been other people. It may have been us and our own lack of discipline, our own maybe overindulgence. We've been perhaps too accepting of people. We've perhaps been too nice. And so with this hexagram, there's a temptation to go the opposite way. So if, for example, our generosity has been taken advantage of, then the temptation would be to be completely mean and to not give anyone a break, not listen to anyone anymore, not to be at all generous anymore. But don't go to extremes in terms of limitation. Gentle limitation. Doing it in an organic and balanced way, because if you go too far, you're going to be miserable, everyone else is going to be miserable, and it's not going to be a good outcome. So do get the balance right. And that's the I Ching. And now I want to look at the horoscope of Mark Rutte, who is going to be he's going to be the Secretary General of NATO on October the 1st, and he's currently, I believe, the Dutch Prime Minister. I think he's already chosen his replacement, but October the 1st is the big day when everything changes. So let's start off by looking at Mark Rutte's horoscope. I'm not saying it's not a chart that I find particularly interesting. Apparently he's a very good politician. I don't know anything about Dutch politics, but apparently he's an effective politician. I believe he's been Prime Minister since 2010. So in terms of staying power, I mean, he's certainly got something right. So let's have a look. So here is his natal chart. He was born in 1967, February the 14th, Valentine's Day. And I think we have an exact time of birth here, 6:53 p.m. in The Hague in the Netherlands. So he has got Virgo rising, and he's got Pluto in Virgo. So I suppose someone with Pluto in Virgo rising is, they're quite into their own power. Power is important. Control does matter. And he's got Sun in Aquarius, and he's got the Moon in Aries. So his Sun and his Moon, in a way, are very well configured. His Moon is his moon is sextile the sun. So someone with moon sextile the sun, regardless of the signs in which the sun and the moon are in, is able to get on with people. It's a very harmonious aspect. He does what's right. He's not going to rock the boat, and I think that does really help. And additionally, you can see his social skills from the fact that he's got Mercury and Venus and Saturn and Chiron in Pisces. So he knows how to, I suppose, form coalitions, how to make political alliances, and that's because he's got these planets in Pisces. So that must be really useful for him. And look at his Jupiter in Cancer, trine Venus. So Jupiter in Cancer, Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, though Jupiter can be quite moralistic in Cancer, because it's exalted. Jupiter has a clear idea about the way things should be, and Moon in Aries square Jupiter, I suppose he can be forthright about what is right and wrong. Moon in the ninth house represents overseas, what's happening that is abroad. So I suppose if you're Prime Minister of the Netherlands, but I suppose any Prime Minister has to deal with a lot of overseas negotiation. That's just the nature of the job. But just becoming a Secretary General of an international organization, if you've got the moon in the ninth house, just must feel great. And it may even be the right thing for him to do, because he's got the North Node in the ninth house. The North Node is like thinking about the international dimension of things. And I don't think he's someone who should be underestimated. He's got Mars in Scorpio, Mars at 0 degrees Scorpio. That is a strong Mars. Mars rules Scorpio, though it's conjunct the South Node, widely conjunct the South Node. So, we might be thinking, well, at times he can put his energy into the wrong things. And I suppose when it comes to this whole Ukraine thing, and he's been very vocal in his opposition to Russia, and he's obviously going to become even more vocal when he becomes Secretary General of NATO. Mars in Scorpio, that is a very aggressive placement for Mars. But I don't know. I don't find it a particularly interesting chart, to be honest. He's got Pluto, Uranus, sort of opposition Saturn. So he was born in the mid-late 60s, and there were this opposition involving, the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, opposition Saturn. So, he was part of that generation who were sort of, when they were born into all the tensions and stresses of the 60s. But what we really want to know is what's going to happen now, because he is about to become Secretary General of NATO. And I think that whenever you get a change of personnel in a big organization like this, even if he doesn't have a great deal of power, it is going to affect the organization, and it's going to affect the effectiveness of that organization. And so here's a chart for when he actually becomes Secretary General of NATO. I've no idea whether it happens on a dot of midnight, whether there's a ceremony on October 1st, but it's October the 1st, 2024. I mean, I've gone for 9 in the morning. So this is when the new Secretary General takes over from the previous one, who is Jens Stoltenberg. And we need to look at the moon, and we need to look at what it's aspecting. So we can see that the moon is in Virgo, and it is opposition Neptune, moving to an opposition of Neptune, and it's moving to a square of Jupiter. And so I don't think that that is a particularly fortunate time to be becoming Secretary General of NATO, really. And the moon is seriously waning. I mean, look at the moon. It's at 22 Virgo, and the sun is at 8 Libra. So when's the full moon? Sorry, the new moon. So the new moon in October is on the 2nd. So the next day, there's a new moon. So you really shouldn't be doing things like this, appointing new leaders just before the new moon. You know, we've got the same thing in British politics, because on July the 5th, it seems that Keir Starmer will become Prime Minister, and on July the 5th, when he becomes Prime Minister, it is just before a new moon. So that's not fortunate when you do something just before a new moon. So that doesn't really help his appointment. And look at the moon, it's moving towards a conjunction of the South Node. So we could say that this appointment represents the end of something. Oh, by the way, don't be fooled by the ascendant. I have no idea what time he was born. Sorry, what time the appointment actually happens. So I'm probably misleading you by putting Placidus house cusps on there. So let me just remove the Placidus house cusps. So yeah, there it is. There's the moon moving towards the new moon. So it's not a good. I don't think, a good time to have a new appointee. So as far as Rutte is concerned, what is happening to him when he becomes Secretary General of NATO? So let's we'll put his chart in the middle, and we'll put the outer wheel. So we've got the chart for his appointment on the outer wheel. Look at Uranus. Uranus is retrograde. It's conjunct Algol. So Uranus is on his midheaven. That Uranus, it is retrograding off, but it will station at some point in here. When does Uranus station? Uranus, I think it's. When does Uranus go stationary? Let me just check. Okay, Uranus is actually going retrograde for the rest of the year, but next year it will come back. So Uranus will be on his midheaven next year. So that's just something going on. So that's a note for the future. Another note for the future is his Saturn. Notice his Saturn is at 28 degrees Pisces. So he's approaching his Saturn return. I mean, he's actually sort of experiencing his Saturn return at the moment, but it's not there quite yet. And a Saturn return can be quite a difficult time for him. And Neptune is on his Saturn as well. So Neptune is at 28 degrees 14 Pisces when he becomes Secretary General of NATO. You know, there's him trying to keep control of things, but Neptune is sort of sapping away at him. So I think that's not great. And also, this Saturn, it goes stationary at around it goes stationary, I think, on November the 15th at around 13 Pisces. So, or 12 Pisces. So, as he becomes Secretary General of NATO, he's going to have Saturn conjunct his Mercury. So, that means reality, tough decisions, tough thoughts, realizing that things are not as good as he'd realized. That may say something about what's going on in Ukraine. So perhaps as he becomes leader of NATO, this may be a time when the situation in Ukraine, from NATO's perspective, is moving from bad to worse. So Saturn is chewing up his planets. He's got Mercury in Pisces, Venus in Pisces, Saturn in Pisces, and Saturn's chewing it all up. And Neptune, of course, is conjunct his Saturn. So that, to my mind, doesn't look great. And the moon is going to be conjunct his Uranus, always his Uranus, so that's going to be part of his appointment. But that appointment chart is going to have the moon in late Virgo, opposition his Uranus. So I do think that could be a problem. And so that's the broad picture in terms of what's happening at the time of his appointment. Then we have to consider other things like his solar return. So he was born February the 14th, 1967. So we do need to consider his solar return for this year. So here is his solar return for 2024. Notice that his solar return for 2024 has Neptune on his midheaven. So how do we see Neptune on the midheaven? Neptune on the midheaven is perhaps about a confused sense of purpose and direction. And I suppose that might reflect that he's transitioning from Dutch politics, as Prime Minister of Holland, into being Secretary General of NATO. Of course, it's only just been announced that he has become Secretary General of NATO. I think there were other candidates for the position, but now I think it's just been confirmed that there's only he's the last candidate standing. So Neptune conjunct Pisces, Neptune conjunct midheaven in the solar return does indicate, to my mind, a certain amount of confusion and the idea that things are changing. Look at the moon as well. The moon is about to change sign. The moon is at 2914 Aries. So he seems to be on the cusp of some kind of change. But that is the direct solar return. Now, we've been looking at direct and converse solar returns over the last few months. And I think we've found that converse solar returns can often be more powerful than direct ones. So this is for his 57th birthday. So he was born in 1967. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at his solar return for 1910, which is 57 years before he was born. So here is his 1910 solar return. And this solar return is really quite dramatic. We have Saturn in Aries on the 7th house cusp. That is a fairly disastrous Saturn. Saturn in Aries represents his enemies. His enemies are strong. Remember, Saturn is fallen in Aries. So that's pretty grim, that's Saturn. And look at Neptune. There's a Saturn-Neptune square. Neptune square his ascendant, and Saturn. So there's real confusion and dissolution here. And Uranus is right on the IC. So, and of course we've got Saturn square Uranus. So this the sort of T-square involving Neptune, Saturn, and Uranus, which was around in 1910, is roaring back into action, 114 years later. And it affects him this year. And another point is his moon. That moon, at the time of his converse solar return, hits his own chart in a big way. So there is Rutte's chart in the middle. There's his Mars at 0 degrees 32 Scorpio. And so the moon is at 0 degrees 57 Taurus. So moon is directly opposition his Mars. And that's talking about the conflict. And obviously this is to do with Ukraine. It has to be. So from a solar return perspective, this is, I think, quite a difficult year. And I suspect that things are going to get more difficult after he becomes Secretary General. And finally, I wanted to consider his solar arc directions for when he becomes... his solar arc directions for when he becomes Secretary General of NATO. So this is basically moving every planet approximately 57 degrees. No, that's the wrong one. Sorry. That's what. Sorry, it's not that. It's that's the one. Sorry. So there are his solar arc directions on the outer wheel, and on the inner wheel is Rutte's horoscope. Now, there is a really good solar arc direction here, and that's solar arc. There's his Jupiter at 26 Cancer, well placed Jupiter, exalted. But if you move it forward around 57 degrees, it gets to the degree of, or very close to, his Uranus. And in fact, so as the announcement happens that he has become Secretary General of NATO, directed Jupiter on his Uranus. He's really happy. He's relieved. I think he didn't think he'd get the job. I think he really wants to be Secretary General of NATO. I think it's his dream job. Amazingly. Maybe it's because he's got Mars in Scorpio and he likes all the, I don't know, all the fighting, aggression, standing up to Russia. That's what he wants to do. So he's happy to get the job. I don't know why he's happy to get the job, but apparently he is. At least that's what I get from a perspective of solar arc directions. And how is this job going to actually turn out for him? His solar arc directed Saturn is moving towards his midheaven. Now, that solar arc directed Saturn is going to actually hit his midheaven in about 3 years' time. So he's probably starting to feel it, but it's like maybe with that solar arc direction, we can see the end. 3 years' time, that's probably when he gives up the job. Perhaps when he turns 60. Because he's 57 now, so maybe he's got the idea he'll do the job until he's 60. That's the end of the job, but he's already feeling it. And I suppose if you're starting a job with Saturn slowly moving towards a conjunction with your midheaven, that may be a bad sign. How well is he going to do the job? Even if he does the job brilliantly, is it going to be good enough? And Saturn directed, at 25, 24 Taurus, it's already made the opposition to his Neptune. So that's already happened. So what's going to happen over the next year is that solar arc directed Saturn is going to be on his midheaven Neptune midpoint. So Saturn on the midheaven Neptune midpoint gives an idea of someone who is, frankly, very confused about the role he's doing. Why is he doing the job? What is he doing the job? Coming to some false ideas about what it's all about. I think he doesn't know what he's doing, to be honest, with Saturn starting to move to a midheaven Neptune midpoint. And I think the question of what is the role of NATO is going to become an increasing issue, not just for the organisation, but of course for its leader. And Mark Rutte has to deal with all of this. So that directed Saturn, it's already causing problems. And over the next year or two, so probably in about 18 months' time, Saturn will be on the midheaven Neptune midpoint, and I don't think that's going to be good. I don't think that's going to be useful. I think that's going to, make him, I think, very confused. Now, we do have two exact solar arc directions. One solar arc direction relates to his solar arc directed Mars. So his solar arc directed Mars, when he becomes Secretary General of NATO, is at 2755 Sagittarius. His Saturn is at 28 Pisces. So solar arc directed Mars hitting his Saturn, that represents a block. And it's really angry, nothing happens, it's about frustration. And again, I'm thinking that it's to do with the war in Ukraine. Okay, it might be about his personal life. He might fall downstairs and break something. It could be about that. But we're not looking at him in terms of him as a person. Politicians are not people. They're just instruments of the cosmos. Just remember that. We shouldn't personalize this. We're only interested in Mark Rutte because he's going to be Secretary General of NATO, because he's Prime Minister of the Netherlands. And I think it's reasonable to think that with directed Mars square his Saturn, there are going to be problems. And I would guess that it relates to Ukraine. And finally, directed Saturn. Remember that Saturn that is that is about to hit his midheaven, that is on with Saturn, that's on the Neptune midheaven midpoint. It's also starting to hit his Sun. In fact, it will have already hit his Sun. So he will have Saturn square his Sun exactly, and that's real frustration. He can't get things done. He's just annoyed, angry, and blocked. And so if we go back to Rutte's chart, he has actually got Neptune on the IC in his natal chart, and the Sun is square his midheaven, square his IC, and it's a sort of a T square. And he's got this all the time. Now, maybe he's got away with it so far, being a successful politician, but that's because maybe he hasn't had Saturn on that configuration. But solar arc directed Saturn is now basically solidly on that configuration for the next few years. And I think that is going to cause absolute havoc. So overall, I would suggest looking at Mark Rutte and looking at his solar return, looking at his solar arc direction. I suspect he's going to be a bit of a disaster as Secretary General of NATO. I know he's supposed to be a very competent politician. Maybe he was great as Prime Minister, but as Secretary General of NATO, this solar arc direction is, and plus the fact he's got his Saturn return coming up, Saturn chewing through his Pisces planets. It's not looking good. It may not be his fault that he is a disaster as Secretary General of NATO, but I do believe that sooner or later it will be shown that he is probably going to turn out to be NATO's least successful Secretary General. Okay, that's all I'm going to say for today. I hope you found this video of some interest. If you enjoyed this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you enjoyed it and you're not subscribed, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.